Here's a very brief introduction to a very large topic, that of time management. I'll warn you right at the beginning that I feel a little bit like Woodrow Wilson, the 28th President of the United States. The apocryphal story goes that he was at a dinner party when a lady seated next to him expressed her admiration for his public speaking ability and asked him how long it would take to prepare a 10-minute speech. He responded that it would take about a week to write such a thing, and the lady was really surprised at this. "My goodness," she said, "how long would it take you to prepare to speak for an entire hour?" Wilson answered, "Oh, that I could do right now." It does take longer to prepare a short, focused speech than a long, meandering one. I've tried to be focused in these videos, but honestly, in my face-to-face class, the topic of time management typically spreads out over more than one class session, and does take me a few hours to cover. I've condensed the material and left out a lot of details, but this is still way too long for a video format. Feel free to take an occasional break as needed, but please do watch everything because I think it will be useful. The first thing we need to ask ourselves is why we even bother to study time management. We all have certain tasks that stem from the responsibilities we carry because of who we are. If we made a list of these tasks, they might include our college work, our job or maybe jobs, the driving we have to get to places, relationships we have with family and significant others, personal care, both physical and spiritual or psychological, the eating necessary to keep us going, and of course the cooking that makes the eating possible. A healthy amount of sleep every day, some recreation, and whatever else you might think of that I've missed. Here I've listed these tasks and made some guesses as to how long you might spend on each of them. You could pause this video and fill in your own more accurate numbers. Some of you might be carrying a different course load, for example, or have different hours you work every week. You might think that an hour a day just isn't enough time for your relationships. If your head is shaved, the time I've suggested for showering and such is probably more than you need. But then again, becoming presentable to the public might take you longer, depending on your own sense of style. Eating and cooking might vary a little bit too. I'm hoping that you don't lower the amount of time allotted for sleep. Getting too little sleep is one of the worst things about modern life, so don't cheat yourself from what you actually need. Recreation might be too low here if you have hobbies or favorite shows, or if you have an addiction to your tablet. Everyone is different, but in this example of my imaginary typical student, the total time comes to 181 hours per week, which is a problem because each day has only 24 hours, and 24 times 7 is 168. The reason we all feel so rushed is that we've bitten off more than we can chew. We literally do not have enough hours in the day to get everything done that we want to do. And that's why it's important to learn something about time management. One way to look at time management is to think of it as having 4 components. Let's look at each of these one by one. First, we need to work to create an environment that will actually support us in the goals we want to accomplish. The way I always teach this class, connecting with ideas, is that I assume that you are all intelligent, thoughtful people, so I often give a variety of choices. I encourage you to try them out, and then I recommend that you decide on the choice that works best for you. We're all different. So for this one, you might be the person who wants a little bit of noise in the background while you are working, whether it's Bach or the Beatles or Beyoncé. Or you might be the person who wants it dead silent. Whichever you prefer, you need a comfortable place to put yourself, a nice chair perhaps, but not one so comfortable that you fall asleep. My own favorite place to read is stretched out on the couch. But I have to admit, that's also my favorite place to fall asleep reading. So if I have to actually learn something, I do prefer the chair in my office. As far as other essentials, you'll need a flat surface to write on, a place to put your devices, a way to keep other essentials handy, things like paper and yellow stickies and staplers and so on. If you need more details, just Google organizing your workspace and you'll get lots of ideas. Again, my own advice is that you choose what works best for you. Our next big topic is how to set priorities. And again, there are several methods. Try each of them and then keep using the one that works best for you. The Eisenhower Matrix method was popularized by Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And by the way, if you haven't read this book, I encourage you to pick up a copy from the library and read it. It has lots of powerful self-help advice. Anyway, the Eisenhower Matrix was used by President Eisenhower. You might remember him as the president we talked about in the video about doing probability without higher mathematics. The Eisenhower matrix has 2 rows and 2 columns. The 2 rows help you decide how important a particular task is, and the 2 columns help you decide how urgent a task is. Notice here that I'm emphasizing that this is entirely up to you. They are your 24 hours a day, not someone else's, and you get to decide which tasks are important to you. Anyway, these 2 rows and 2 columns divide the matrix up into 4 quadrants, which have been numbered here so that it's more convenient for us to talk about them. Quadrant 1 holds tasks that are important and urgent. You can see some examples here, and you should just do those things. Don't procrastinate. They're urgent. Just get them done now. Quadrant 2 holds tasks that are important but not as urgent, so it would be easy to put them off. In fact, it's all too easy, so the best thing to do with a Quadrant 2 task is to schedule it in a planner or using some calendar app on a device. A lot of your schoolwork falls into this category. Your math homework is important to your grade, but if it's not due until Monday, it's easy to push it to the back burner. The best way to handle it is to schedule a specific time to work on it, and that way you make sure that it gets done on time. The 2 examples here are important enough that I want to mention them. Exercise is important, but it's never urgent. Does it really matter whether you do those push-ups now or in a few hours or maybe even tomorrow? No, but exercise is important, so it's a good idea to set up a schedule for it if you haven't already made it a habit. And vocation planning is another important but not urgent task. In your context, what this means is that it's important to talk to your academic advisor to find out what courses you should take over the next few years. It's not something that needs to be done right this second, but it does need to be done, or you'll end up enrolled in the wrong classes, messing up your smooth journey through college. I used to require my Connecting with Ideas students to actually make an appointment with their advisor during the course, and doing so counted for a grade. I'm not requiring that this semester, but you should still make that appointment. You'll thank me later. Quadrant 3 then. These are activities that don't hold any inherent importance, but they're urgent in the sense that they pop up and kind of have to be handled whenever they do. I used to work for a company where my office was part of a big cubicle farm, lots of desks separated by Herman Miller cloth walls, and no doors. If someone suddenly appeared in my doorway, their presence kind of made whatever they wanted urgent. But let me tell you, it often wasn't all that important. That's an example of an interruption. It distracts you from the zone you're in while working, and wastes time because it usually takes more than a few minutes to get back in the flow you were in before the interruption. You might have noticed here that some phone calls are in Quadrant 1 and some are in Quadrant 3, so let's talk about that. I'll give you an example from my own life. If my phone rings, then it's urgent because it's ringing, and if I wait even a few seconds, I've missed the call. But whether it's important or not depends on lots of things. If it's my boss or a student, then of course it's important, and that puts it in Quadrant 1, so I answer it right then. After all, that's my job, it's what I do for a living, and if I ignored the call, I wouldn't be doing what I was supposed to do. On the other hand, if the call is from my mother, well, as much as I love my mother dearly, her call probably isn't urgent. When Covey wrote his book and showed this matrix with its examples, most people didn't have caller ID, and so they were kind of stuck. But if I see it's my mother, I mutter a little prayer, and then, well, I decide to call her back later, on my own time, when her call won't be a distraction. And that's the general advice for how to handle Quadrant 3 tasks. Delegate them. This doesn't help if you're an ordinary person with no secretary or minions, but our devices do give us some ability to delegate tasks, as in the caller ID example I just gave. On to Quadrant 4, which consists of tasks that are neither urgent nor important. We should just skip these because of what we just said. They're not important and they're not urgent. Many of them are time wasters or little tiny tasks that keep us busy but fail to bear any real fruit. So don't do these at all. But let me say, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Playing Angry Birds once in a while might not be urgent or important, but you might enjoy it a lot, and it might even have some psychological value as a release from the pressures of the day. Okay then, the categorization of tasks is, after all, entirely up to you, and what we just described could easily count as a Quadrant 2 task. If Angry Birds does create a needed escape, then fine, but treat it as a Quadrant 2 task and schedule it. Use limits on your devices so that the games you enjoy don't run away with your precious time. The same with TV shows. A good DVR can turn an urgent task into a scheduled task, as long as your friends don't spoil the ending before you've seen the show yourself. Before we move on to another method to prioritize tasks, let me clarify something about this Eisenhower matrix. You probably wouldn't actually fill out a matrix like this, although you might. Its real value is as a tool, so that when you are in the doing things mode, you can think about which quadrant you are in at the moment, and that helps you choose whether to continue your current activity or switch to a different task. Our second method to prioritize tasks is one invented by Alan Lakian in his book, How to Get Control of Your Time and Your Life. I'm going to break the cardinal rule of PowerPoint slides and actually read this long paragraph verbatim to you. My excuse is that it explains the method well, and it's actually a pretty good testimonial. When I was a young man just out of law school and eager to get on with my life, on a whim, I briefly put aside my reading preference for fiction and history and bought one of those how-to books, How to Get Control of Your Time and Your Life by Alan Lakian. The book's main point was the necessity of listing short, medium, and long-term life goals, then categorizing them in order of their importance, with the A group being the most important, the B group next, and the C the last. Then listing under each goal specific activities designed to achieve them. I still have that paperback book, now almost 30 years old, and I'm sure I have that old list somewhere buried in my papers, though I can't find it. However, I do remember the A list. I wanted to be a good man, have a good marriage and children, have good friends, make a successful political life, and write a great book. Okay, nice testimonial, but who cares if some random person liked the method? Well, this paragraph was taken from an autobiography titled My Life, and the random author was Bill Clinton, another president of these United States, so there might be something to this method. I read this book myself in high school and used this system for many years before I switched to something else that we'll talk about in a few minutes. You should try it, and then if it works for you, keep doing it. A third method to prioritize our tasks is the Pareto method, named after an Italian economist. Pareto noticed about 100 years ago that 80% of privately held land in Italy was owned by only 20% of the people, and the Pareto principle claims that this ratio holds in a lot of different fields. It's never unexpected to find that 80% of the consequences come from 20% of the causes. In marketing, 80% of sales come from 20% of customers. In criminal justice, 80% of the crimes are committed by 20% of the criminals. In the stock market, 80% of your returns will come from 20% of your investments, and so on. You can invent your own examples. So how does this apply to prioritizing tasks? Well, you have to pay attention and you have to think about things, but you can probably notice that 80% of what you want out of life does come from 20% of the things you do. If it's possible for you to notice what those 20% of things are, then those become your priority. And just in passing, I'll admit that this sort of reflection is not easy for many people, so I wouldn't recommend the Pareto method as your first choice. Try one of the others. You might notice that the Lakean ABC method requires that you think about the value of something, and the Eisenhower matrix definitely needs you to estimate whether a task is important or not. So if you find yourself becoming good at knowing the value of a task, you can gradually switch over to the Pareto method, which would be much less formal than either of the other two. Once we've prioritized our tasks, our job becomes that of doing those important, valuable tasks. Using a task list really is the best way to accomplish this. Lakean's ABC method really wants you to make the task list first and then label each task with A or B or C according to its importance. Then you start in on the A's, and when they're finished, move on to the B's, and it really doesn't matter whether you ever get to the C's because they are lower priority. There's a lot more that could be said about task lists, but I'm going to save that discussion until a little later when we talk about another system. Finally, our fourth topic of time management is how to reduce time spent on non-priorities. What are these non-priorities? They're quadrant 4 activities in the Eisenhower matrix, or they're C tasks in the Lakean categorization, or they're those 80% of things that don't give sufficient return in the Pareto method. So how do we deal with them? Most of the best methods are really psychological. Willpower could work if your will is strong enough, although I'll admit that it doesn't work for me. Positive and negative reinforcements are another way. Think of a way to treat yourself after completing some task that you've been putting off. Negative reinforcements also work, but they're harder to implement without a helper. If this appeals to you, Google for more on it. When we talk about reducing time spent on non-priorities, we're really talking about procrastinating. It's not really possible for us humans not to be doing something. So if we're spending time on non-priorities, it means we're not spending time on our priorities. In other words, we're procrastinating. I'm the king of the procrastinators. I joke that I didn't get my birthmark until I was 12 years old. But over the years, I've learned various ways to deal with it. One of my favorite techniques, anti-procrastination techniques, is the Pomodoro technique, invented by, well, another Italian fellow whose name escapes me at the moment. Anyway, the Italian word pomodoro means tomato, and in this case it refers to a tomato-shaped kitchen timer like the one shown. It's what he had, so it's what he used, and that's the entire backstory on this technique's name. It doesn't actually have anything to do with tomatoes. So, how does the Pomodoro technique work? The idea is that you get yourself a timer. The real fanatics do indeed get a timer shaped like a tomato, which you can find on Amazon. I just use one on my cell phone. So, you get yourself a timer, set it for 25 minutes, and start working on the task you've been putting off. At the end of the 25-minute block of time, you make a little check mark on a piece of paper to keep track of your progress, and then you set the timer for another 5 minutes. This is your break time. If you want to play Angry Birds, go for it. It's entirely up to you. At the end of the 5 minutes, set the timer for 25 minutes again, and perform another block of focused work. Then another check mark, and then another 5-minute break. Cycle through like this 3 or 4 times, and then reward yourself with a longer break. It sounds too simple to actually work, but surprisingly enough, it does. If you're a beginner at Pomodoro, or if the task you've been avoiding is particularly unpleasant, you can play around with the first durations. Start by setting the timer for 10 minutes, or even less, instead of committing to an entire 25-minute long segment. When I do this myself, I find that if I set the timer low, then when it goes off, I don't want to quit because I have actually created a little momentum. Technically, the Pomodoro technique requires that we be as strict taking the scheduled breaks as we are with the work times, so I am supposed to quit. But if I'm starting off with a shorter interval, I do break this rule and keep working. I think it works because psychologically I know that I can quit in just a few minutes. The timer is going, and I won't die if I stick to it just a little longer. Try it if you're a procrastinator, and let me know how it works for you. So, that's a summary of 4 themes of time management, and I do think this video is a little too long already. I'm not done talking about time management, and I do have more slides, but I'm going to take a little break here, and I encourage you to do the same. When you're rested, come back to this video, continue on. We'll talk about a big system that's deservedly popular, as well as some other tools you might like to try out. Thanks for watching. See you again soon. Great to have you back. Let's continue our discussion on time management by looking at one big system and then some ad hoc smaller tools you might find useful. The big system is called Getting Things Done, invented by this fellow named David Allen. His system has almost cult-like status. What I mean is, the people who like it, they really like it. On the internet, you might find it going by its acronym GTD. So if you want to search for more about it, you might use GTD instead of Getting Things Done, just to save your typing fingers a little bit of work. Sometimes getting things done does sound a little bit like a religion. Allen believes that creative workers, such as you students, can't do their best work if their minds aren't as focused as possible. Does this sound a little like Zen to you? Anyway, the idea is that if you're trying to write a term paper, but your mind suddenly pops up worried that you might forget to take the garbage out tonight, or pick up that prescription tomorrow, or call your Aunt Mildred about the picnic this weekend, or whatever, then the term paper will suffer because your mind isn't staying where it should. Allen's solution to this difficulty is to create a trustworthy system that can hold literally everything you ever want to do. In this sense, getting things done includes not just the tasks you need to get done today, but also includes all of the goals you have for your entire life. Obviously, a system that comprehensive deserves a bit more than a short video voiceover for a couple slides. In my face-to-face classes, I've talked about getting things done at length, maybe a half hour or more. If I were to go that long here, I still don't think I could do an adequate job, and you'd have serious trouble trying to stay awake. So I'm going to show you just one little chart to give you some flavor, and then encourage you to delve deeper on your own if this sort of system appeals to you. So here's a flow chart of part of David Allen's Getting Things Done system. There's a lot more to it than this, but the basic idea here is that stuff, email, snail mail, tasks from bosses, tasks from spouses, tasks from teachers, ideas you have, noticing the car is low on gas, whatever, let's just call it all stuff. Stuff comes into your conscious awareness, and this flowchart shows you how to handle those items. Our first big question at the top is whether the stuff, the new item, is actionable. Does it lead to something we need to do? Not everything does. Today in the mail I got a check that I needed to deposit, definitely actionable, and a notice from my insurance company that they had lowered my rates for some reason or other. This was not actionable, there was nothing I needed to do, but it's still nice to know. So let's follow the flowchart through for the check. It's actionable, so I next ask whether it takes just a single step to complete the action of depositing it. Thanks to an app on my phone, the answer is yes, just one step. And again, thanks to the app, it takes less than 2 minutes. So the flowchart says, do it. And that's what I did. Done. No procrastination. Easy peasy. My mind won't pop up later and say, hey, don't forget to deposit that check, when I'm in the middle of some focused task. What happened with the notification from the insurance company? At the top of the flowchart, I asked whether it was actionable and determined that it wasn't, so I moved to the right and I had 3 choices. I could trash it. I didn't want to do that because it's kind of important, at least for a while. My second option was to put it in a someday maybe category. Just because it's not actionable now doesn't mean it might not be in the future. Putting something in this category is the way to keep your mind settled. If you have a trusted system, your subconscious knows that things in the someday maybe category are safely stored away and will be revisited from time to time so that nothing falls through the cracks. Having a system like this actually does seem to have the benefit of quieting down the extraneous, interrupting self-talk that some of us would otherwise suffer from. But that didn't fit the notification. It wasn't something that I wanted to plan to deal with later. Instead, it fell into the third option, reference. I have a nice file cabinet. David Allen says a typical person needs 4 drawers, and it already has a folder labeled with the name of my insurance company. So I just dropped the notification in there, and I was done. No need for my subconscious mind to mention it to me unannounced anytime soon or ever. If you want to look over more of this flowchart, you'll see that some more complicated tasks turn into projects that could have their own subtasks. Some items are delegated to other people that we wait for, and some tasks get scheduled for specific times or specific contexts. This probably looks a little complicated, but trust me, it's a lot simpler than it appears. And I do think that it has some valuable payoffs, not only psychologically, but also because I do think it helps me get things done. Now, in full disclosure mode, I'll admit that there is no time management system in the world that would want me as its celebrity spokesperson. Because of my ongoing tendency to procrastinate, I'm definitely not a role model. But I'm telling you what works for me, and I'm telling you that without these tools, I would be even worse off. And then aside, while it's perfectly possible to use the Getting Things Done system entirely on paper, I did it for years, it's even more effective with the right software. In the past, I've used some Outlook add-ons, and currently I use an app called Things on my iPhone. It's one of the few apps that I've actually paid money for, and it's worth every penny. It's how I keep my task list organized. One last slide to mention a few other tools that you might find useful. David Seah is a graphic designer in Canada, and he's invented a few paper forms that you can print out and use to organize your day or your tasks, and I encourage you to check them out. I've listed a couple of my favorites here. As usual, my advice is to try everything and keep using whatever works best for you. In the past, I used to require students in this class to fill out the emergent task timer for a few days and hand it in with some comments to the discussion board. I've also mentioned that particular tool to other instructors of connecting with ideas, and I know that a few of them now use that same assignment. So, that's an overly long but still all too brief introduction to time management. If you want to be a successful student, you'll probably find that you need some sort of system to keep you on track. I hope some of this has been useful to you in that regard. Thank you for watching.